levels under physical safety?
You know, I took those directly off our agenda, so I think that would be a question to the chair.
Well, because, I mean, that's really the key thing that we're coming up with, so it's not even on your slide.
I think it is under physical safety.
Okay. I mean, physical safety could mean something falling over and hitting you, but so.
Yes.
But maybe Jerry could.
Well, that's the way I interpreted it, but maybe some of you interpret it somewhat differently. I've sort of expressed a point of view here with the group that physical safety, in terms of a tower falling or ice throwing, you know, currents of ice throwing, is pretty much short distances, but those short distances, I think, are inadequate to protect people from noise levels that are disturbing.
I just wanted to make it clear, but when you look at our draft,
yeah,
physical safety and noise limitations are two separate items. And so that is the key thing here that's, I see, left off of the slide here.
Yeah, I took this for the purposes of explaining where we were, directly off of our work group minutes.
Okay.
And related to one of your slides, concern, the third slide, there's no generally accepted scientific proof, and that's underlined, associated with positive and or negative health effects. I think that's debatable. That's been the...
I think that's the issue, yes.
That's the issue all along.
Right.
I just put this notebook together this morning, so I didn't get to classify it, but section by sections. But this article, this report by the OEA and Canadian the Canadian Wind Energy Association in 2009 has sort of been the Bible, if you will, that's been quoted all over the country as the express view, of course, of the wind industry, and that it is the express view. This is not a scientific document. This is a public report. It was published in the sense that it was released to the public as a document that anyone can see. But as you know, one of the complaints of the wind industry has been that there is no scientific evidence that there are any adverse health effects from wind turbine noise. And yet the industry has not produced any document other than documents like this, white papers I would call them, to express its own view. Any document that would come close to being a scientific document, yet the industry continues to criticize the other point of view by saying that there is no experimental, scientific, peer-reviewed literature definitively showing there are negative adverse health effects. And Dr. McCunney, who some of you guys in Mason County heard from, or came to Mason County recently to hear, did talk to the group from Massachusetts on a teleconference call. He has become kind of the, by default, for some reason, the spokesperson for the wind industry in this country, I think. I mean, as much as anyone else. There are others, but in Europe, for example, it's Jeff Leventhal, and there are a lot of other names that are on either side of the issue, but McCunney seems to rise to the top when you think about all the people who have testified in courts around the country, primarily in the Midwest and the New England states, I think, quote, for the wind industry point of view. And I'd like to say as chair of the committee that we are the Wind and Health Technical Work Group. We're not the Wind versus Health Technical Work Group. I think we try to take the point of view, sometimes I don't come across that way, frankly, but I've tried to take the point of view that we need to think carefully about preserving health while advocating the use, the development of wind turbine projects. I still hesitate to call them wind farms, but wind farms, if you will. With that in mind, let me say that, and this is kind of for review purposes for our committee as well, the vote that was taken on the committee at the last meeting indicated that it was a pretty even split between folks on the committee who would like to see a level of 40, I believe, 45 and 50, those three levels, or somewhere between 40 to 45 was one vote, I think. Incorporated into our draft report. I felt a little bit late in the game, but I came along about a week ago and submitted to you guys a document that was a legal brief out of Vermont, which just became available, which I thought expressed a lot of my own personal feelings about, as an audiologist, about some of these issues. McConey was one of the persons probably most quoted in the brief. It was a brief, it was a document that summarized the legal hearing, I believe. Probably depositions. I think there was a court case, which I think has not been decided, the outcome on it. The outcome has not been decided yet, as far as I know. So none of that is legal as far as we're concerned. It's not scientific, but I thought at least it represented a legal document that people are reluctant to lie on the stand, and they were under oath. And I thought it expressed pretty close my point of view. Instead of going into detail trying to summarize it, I just sent you guys the report. And I indicated where you could find a short summary of the overall brief. So I don't know whether that needs to play into our discussion today or not. We'll get to that, and we'll get to noise in a little bit. I'd like to get back on track and talk a bit about what's on the agenda for today. And the question is, how close are we to being, final draft on the issue of these three things: physical safety, shadow flicker, and conflict resolution? Mark provided us some really nice revisions, I think, for the conflict resolution section.
Where is that? I'm not. Was that what you sent out today?
I just sent it out today. I realized I had not sent you, like I normally do, maybe a week before the meeting. I hadn't sent you draft 4, so I have a copy for those of you who have not printed it out.
I need a copy.
Most of these are two-sided. Maybe one or two are one-sided.
The handout you have there is a handout that I've been using in about conflict resolution. It doesn't mention this committee, but in presentations that I've been doing to communities. So the handout that you have here doesn't include the names of individuals that we've identified as having expertise in community dispute resolution and WIN.
Do you think what you gave us would suffice for that section in terms of helping communities?
I think that since I sent you this earlier draft, it's gone through just polish and a little bit of iteration. So I guess I would suggest that if we're going to do this, perhaps this one is just been vetted, more updated, and proofread. But it's the same information. It's just names added to people that have come forth. The Michigan Bar Association, for example, they have a dispute resolution group that is now embracing this WIN resolutions as a special thing.
Does the new revision still talk about mediation? Basically?
Yes.
As a way to go?
Yeah.
Okay. And you don't think we...
Well, as an option.
Okay. The section won't be that long, but I think one point is you want to leave largely conflict resolution open to individual communities. And
yes, I think it's just
principles, guidelines.
Here's for the purposes of updating the modern zoning law in the section on conflict resolution. One option would be for us to say that the community dispute resolution is an option that they can consider or even include in their zoning. I mean, most of these places that I've seen require the developer to have a dispute resolution process. So typical dispute resolution is arbitration litigation.
Well, I liked what you gave us. Could you revise it to update it relative to the things you're talking about?
Yes,
give us
basically
a
that's this.
electronic copy.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, Jerry. What's in the latest draft does not represent what Mark has.
Not exactly.
It's been updated since you got that draft, which was I sent out 2 weeks ago.
Right.
But there has not been a substantial change in content.
And I'm going to give you folks a chance to ask about these things specifically as we move along in a little while.
So I guess, well, I have a question here. So what's crossed out in the latest draft is a recommendation about independent investigatory process. I don't see why the two are mutually exclusive. I don't see why, I mean, mediation, you might want to know what the noise levels are, what's going on, and so I don't see why one would get eliminated if we added mediation as a recommendation, or why they both couldn't do that.
That's exactly right, one would. So this particular piece is with mediation only. It would be in a mediation process if the parties involved in the mediation chose to bring in independent investigators, that would be their choice. In a litigation process, you'd have a binding legal authority that would decide whether or not to bring in that. And of course, in a legal case, you would have both the prosecutors and the defense, or the two attorneys representing the parties. They would bring in their experts to testify. So in this process, what hasn't been used widely is the community dispute resolution process. And it's just a way of how, again, we're supposed to be helping communities in their decision-making on this process. So in terms of adding this option in our recommendations, here's one more thing you can consider. You can also choose to totally ignore community dispute resolution, and indeed you could at the local government level, you could say that community dispute resolution is not allowed.
One thing too, we kind of work on, I think, certain assumptions what are already in local ordinances or zoning, and there's always if you have a requirement in place, right, there's always some process for somebody to approach the local jurisdiction to make sure somebody's in compliance, and then they do an investigation in order to make a determination. Now, I do know, I've seen in some ordinances now, people have a very specific process for violations of the wind zoning ordinance. I guess, and that's something for us to kind of consider. I think if we didn't come up with something specific, what would happen is that the local jurisdiction would do what they always do when there's a violation or a complaint.
So we had something specific in the last draft, because there was the concern about who's competent, that's how I interpret it, who's competent to do noise measurements and how they should be done. And so it talks about approaching the Public Service Commission to get a list of people who could do this type of, so I mean, it was pretty specific, and I guess I'm fine adding what Mark has, but I'd like to keep what we had before.
Well, that part is still in, as I see it.
Well, it's crossed out in the draft, you just
well,
made it up.
right here, the new insertion contains, it also recommends the Bureau of Energy Services and the Michigan Public Services Commission provide communities with contact information for individuals with special expertise in wind-related community dispute resolution, as well as information.
Well, that's very different than approaching the Michigan Public Service Commission to identify independent investigators with, that's very different.
Well, could we say one additional option?
Right, well, I would propose putting back in what's been eliminated, and another option, or in addition, here's, one should consider this approach.
I agree with you, because it's very different. A mediator goes into a dispute and probably has some background in the area, but certainly is not considered an investigator, and isn't necessarily a technical expert.
Right.
Because they go into the dispute to kind of facilitate, hopefully, the parties coming together. Very different sort of thing, but I'd like to ask Julie whether the commission would be willing to do this, because